Today we're here with Andrew Tannenbaum, Michael Gross, and Patrick Ho of Capital Business Credit, and they will be doing today's presentation on using Supplier early payment. A couple of brief things to get out of the way before we begin. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, you can feel free to type them into the questions function on your side panel. We'll take all those questions and bring them together at the end of the presentation for a Q&A with our presenters. The other thing is we do have a very brief survey that will populate as you exit the webinar. It only takes about 15 to 20 seconds to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great insight into how we can continue to make these presentations better for you. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to the CEO of Credit2B, Shailesh Desai, who's going to say a few words about our presenters.
So very briefly, first of all, appreciate everyone taking the time to be on this webinar with us in Capital. We at Credit2B partner very extensively with the firm. Andy Tannenbaum, who's the chairman and really the leader of the organization, both around data and analytics. And our experience has been a group of very high integrity, high quality people, continuously pushing the boundaries of innovation. And we're excited to be partnering with them not only in the data space, but also with regards to what they're trying to do specifically through this webinar. And we sincerely thank them for taking the time to be with us and be with you today to present their views. Take advantage of the feedback button, as Justin said. We want to hear more. So you could, either as a follow-up to this webinar, reach out to us at Credit2B or directly to Capital, and we'll provide some follow-up information to this webinar if there's a need for more. So with that, Andy, I'm going to pass it on to you for the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Shailesh. Those are very kind words, and we appreciate our partnership in the areas that we're currently working and hoping to expand into other areas as well. I want to thank everybody who's attending this webinar today, and hopefully you will get some takeaways that are relevant to your business and give you some insight into the evolving, what I call the supply chain finance world that has been evolving and accelerating over the last couple of years. First of all, I'm going to give you, as you can see, a quick overview of CBC and let you know that essentially I and on our team, an example, Patrick, who is in Asia, have been working in the supply chain finance, working capital, asset management business for suppliers, buyers, and retailers, and generally speaking, cross-border for, I'm going to be sad to say, over 30 years. And so we have seen over this period of time tremendous evolution. And our current platform is that we're focusing on the middle market, and we'll talk about that, is located in, has a global footprint, but principally in the main, what we call ports of entry into the United States of New York, Charlotte, Los Angeles, and Fort Lauderdale. And we have two offices in Hong Kong and Shanghai. The bios of everybody, you'll realize this team is really focused on what we're going to call the supplier early payment. From me to Dave Connolly, who is capable of underwriting both investment grade, non-investment grade buyer credit, which is very important to the product set that we're talking about. Michael Gross, who actually comes out of a company that was in the swimwear business and who's been in both the financial side and in the trade finance side and logistics side for his company. And Patrick Ho, who I have known, gosh, I can't say more, almost 20 years or more, and who has been one of the leading practitioners of trade finance and these types of products out of Asia. So as you can see, from our company's point of view, we like to say that we really have a continuum of products many of which are relevant to today's conversation, reaching back from the exporter all the way through to the retailer. And for your purposes and people who are not dealing in consumer products or not importing, these solutions are applicable, and we do now do it in the United States between buyers and sellers, suppliers and customers, whether they be on a wholesale level, relationship, or they may be ultimately on a customer relationship like a retailer. And what we wanted to basically say from this page is, as a non-bank finance company, these represent our toolkit of products for the unrated, non-investment grade, middle market company that we generally serve. So let's talk about the problem and the webinar focus. I felt that the best way to discuss this is by way of example. And what is our target market? We're focusing not on the investment grade customer, the Walmarts by way of example, who have multi-billion-dollar supply chain finance relationships with banks and their primary suppliers. Nor are we talking about what we'll describe as the poor credit quality buyer for whom we as a financial institution or anyone else who would like to approach this market feels uncomfortable of converting their cash sales or trade credit sales into longer terms that we'll talk about. So what are we focusing on here? We're focusing on those middle market buyers who are non-investment grade that have had long-term relationships with their suppliers. They can be international suppliers or they can be U.S.-based suppliers, and then have found, as is most of the cases, that they have very little problems with their suppliers' performance, timely performance, quality, or delivery risk. And therefore, they are not that concerned about the risk of dilution, chargebacks, or deductions in their relationship with their supplier, and they realize that they have a continuing relationship with those suppliers. So if there is a problem with a shipment, there will be plenty of future business to be done between them that they will be able to recover those deductions or credits. Now, you as we'll call you the buyer, you've been working a long time with this supplier, and what is your goal? You want to improve your working capital utilization, and so you want to extend your open account terms, and you may or may not have the leverage to do so, principally because your supplier is not capable of extending terms any more than he's done today. Or you're the supplier on the other side who have built a special relationship with you as an importer, and he can't handle any larger, he can't carry more of the buyer's paper, and he needs help to turn his working capital and get paid. So we're going to focus now on how to explain supply chain finance solutions to buyers and sellers which improve the working capital management and payment flexibility, extends customer credit and terms, and reduces working capital requirements, and eliminates, if you're still using it, which is rare, LCs and other settlement processes. So let's talk about examples of capital pressure points and cash requirements in the supply chain. The first example regards a $100 million swimwear buyer who produces products in China and Thailand. Now, the challenge is, because he's a swimwear wholesaler, that his suppliers need to produce all their goods and ship it in a very small window in the wintertime. And especially the window around Chinese New Year and in late, let's say, January and February, before he ships a majority of goods starting in March. And he needs, because the suppliers demand liquidity, to pay for their goods in advance of their season shipping window. Now, the second example is Orchard Brands, which has just been acquired by another company. And this is a, let's say, well over maybe a $500 million retailer who has sells multi-channel direct marketing of apparel and home products. Now, they had a challenge too. Orchard Brands, a few years ago, emerged from bankruptcy in 2011. I think I hear somebody's echo on there, so please move their phone. And found that their foreign suppliers who they wanted to continue working with them wouldn't provide them trade credit. And they required cash in advance or cash upon shipment. And the third example is a situation where a textile manufacturer, again, $100+ million company, who was importing sheets and towels and comforters, sees its sales increasing and is being squeezed by its suppliers for more liquidity to pay for the product upon shipment. Now here is a graphic example of what we're talking about in terms of maximizing cash in the supply chain. And what it's focusing on is the both product, the order to cash cycle, from the time that the importer orders from the supplier until that importer gets paid by its end buyer. And the tension is between shortening the days sales outstanding or accounts receivable, and also from the other side, increasing the accounts payable turn, or DPO. Now, if you look at that little box in the bottom that talks about importer pays supplier cash, think about that as a slide ruler, and depending on which side, if you're a buyer or a seller, which way you want to move that importer pays the supplier cash. Do you want to take longer to pay, or do you want to get paid more quickly? Now, one of the things that we're talking about is middle market importers. So let's say you are a investment grade buyer. There is another issue for you, and that is you may want to extend your terms of payment, but you may have a lot of liquidity and a lot of cash. So you may see the idea of supply chain finance as an opportunity to employ your cash at a higher rate of return than you would just keeping it on your balance sheet and in this zero rate environment. But that is not the market that we are active in. It's more the non-investment grade middle market company that probably is an asset-based lender who is growing and needs more liquidity and more working capital availability. And our focus is to be the bridge that will fill this gap of working capital needs of the supplier or the buyer. Now, what we wanted to do in this slide is to show to you the concept of what is going on in supply chain finance. And what you look at is what we call on the left-hand side approved payable finance program. That could be the Walmart program or, in effect, our program. Moving all the way out to the right, where it's more of a technology play on re-engineering the payables departments so that they can provide better servicing and less costly servicing of payables. Now, there's a couple of words that I'm going to throw out here for you to consider when you look at this page. And it's very important, is that we call it approved payable finance. And you can establish that relationship with your supplier or your customer when the customer agrees that he will pay without offset, counterclaim, or dispute, thereby changing the receivable into a credit, a financial obligation, a credit obligation that does not have the same issues that a normal receivable has, and in which people like ourselves or banks can basically provide 100% financing because it's like a financial instrument. And we'll show you how we actually have taken this concept and developed a financial instrument to evidence this obligation. On the bottom, why this is important is to realize that the number of suppliers tends to be a function of the type of business we're talking about or the type of credit that we have to extend to buyers and sellers. And generally speaking, there's a rule in international finance where 80% of your purchases are generally with 5 or fewer suppliers. It's the old 80-20 rule, and that many of your other vendors are really not as important from trying to solve this liquidity problem as in the case of major critical or core suppliers, as compared to what we're calling the non-critical suppliers with lower value activities and lower value spend. So let's jump right into the solution. Supplier early payment. This enables buyers of goods and services to extend payables when supplier and buyer have a long-term mutually beneficial trading relationship. And what we're trying to do is provide optimal early funding to suppliers against the buyer's commitment to pay. These approved invoices, again, without offset, counterclaim, or deduction. Now, when you are in a program like this, you also have the ability to facilitate the process of documents and data between you and your buyer and supplier. And there are many platforms that are developing now which are intended to provide those type of services. And the next thing which is important is that you agree on terms of sale. And in our program, we can take a FOB shipment payable immediately and can, depending on the underlying credit of the buyer, extend up to 120 days terms of sale. The second thing which is important in our product is that the buyer agrees to accept a trade draft or no offset letter. And we will show you, and not so much today, but if we have more interest, we will show you how documentation is extremely simple. That all you'll see requires is that the buyer identify what documents it's prepared to review prior to signing a trade draft evidencing his unconditional, irrevocable obligation to pay. And we, as the intermediary, are prepared to finance 100% of the invoice value minus discounts and pay the supplier immediately. And in our experience, what is very important is that, generally speaking, given the nature of how we transfer documents between the supplier, us, and the buyer, we could fund almost in the same day if we get all the documentation, or we generally fund between 2 to 3 days from the date we get the documentation, which is a lot faster than the existing banking channels and less friction. And most important at the end, for those of you who are not in international finance, the same can be applied in domestic transactions as well. So let's go to a graphic explanation of the timing and the process. So day one, the products are shipped. And what you do is you have a commercial invoice, you have a packing slip, you may have a copy of a bill of lading made to the order of the buyer because you have this special relationship with them. Those documents that have been agreed to in advance between the buyer and seller are presented to us via the internet, and we turn around and get transaction by transaction approval and acceptance by the buyer, and then he returns the drafts to us. And we will pay on day two upon receipt of the trade acceptance. Now, what's important is that, and it gets important from a credit perspective, is that the inventory that is the underlying goods of this international transaction, or if in domestically, are now, title has passed to the buyer, and we as the financier, or you as the shipper, do not retain any control or security interest in the underlying inventory, because like in any open account sale, you're taking unsecured buyer credit. And at the maturity date of the draft, what will happen then is that you, the buyer, pay us in full, and we move on to the next transaction, which can be one where you can set up a line of credit, you can set up you can have multiple drafts outstanding, and it works quite well. And you as a buyer, you can have multiple suppliers in the program as well. So what are the benefits? We're all focusing on this concept of improved working capital management and payment flexibility. First of all, the way we present this between buyer and seller is that there's not necessarily any bank usage by you, the buyer, from the purchase order date, the day you give the order to buy the goods, until the maturity date of the draft. There's no LC usage to support the pre-shipment finance. Because of the relationship that you have and the relationship that we establish with the supplier directly on the ground, let's say in Asia, that Patrick does directly with your suppliers, we have found that without it can eliminate a supplier resistance to extend non-letter of credit terms. We also know that it can extend up to 120 days open account credit terms. But there's another situation that we should talk about at this point. Oftentimes, you have worked as a buyer with your supplier, and he's agreed to give you, let's say, 30-day terms. But that's not enough for you, so you want 120-day terms. So effectively, you want an additional 90 days of open credit terms. Our structure can facilitate that requirement and convert 30-day paper to 120-day paper, And then the buyer and seller can negotiate between them the sharing of the costs and expenses of extended dating versus early payment. It can either be shifted all to the buyer, it can be shifted all to the seller, or it can be shared in some basis between the parties on a negotiated basis. And the other thing which is important for the seller is he can get 100 cents on the dollar upon shipment, pay down his line, and increase his working capital turnover. So from the buyer's perspective, it's additional short-term unsecured financing. It increases your liquidity and borrowing capacity to grow your business, because if you have a line of credit and this supplements that line of credit, your line of credit is unused, and it obviously gives you ability to buy more product, expand your business, etc. Now, if you're an asset-based lender, it also has at the same time the opportunity for you to add the inventory to your borrowing base upon shipment. And if you get availability for goods in transit, it increases your availability there. If you, and then when it enters into the United States and it becomes regular inventory, it increases your inventory availability, and you don't have to draw down, in theory, until the goods are actually shipped to your customer when you have the highest value receivable to draw down and pay for your first cost goods, for goods. It's important to understand that structured the way we do it, it does not create bank debt. It's just a transfer of a payable from or a receivable from, and therefore we're not creating incremental bank debt. And we also have the ability to, once you agree on your document package, to share and review the necessary documents to help you minimize paperwork and administrative costs. And we also find that this product, which differentiates us from many other institutions, is that we really have an on-the-ground presence where your suppliers are located. Now, what's important is in the non-investment grade space is you're always concerned about your customer's credit. And, well, if we are in the business of buying that risk, you are getting 100% credit coverage, no different than if you were in a factoring relationship and you were a seller, or you were selling with the benefit of credit insurance. In fact, from a credit insurance point of view and a factoring point of view, the coverage is 100 cents on the dollar up front, so there is no, you don't have to carry any first loss in this product set. So again, we can offer non-LC terms which may be helpful to the supplier to win the business. He's comfortable because he no longer is concerned with disputes and deductions, and generally speaking, with these special relationships, the buyers have QC and other people on the ground where the goods are being made. He gets 100%, as we said often in this presentation, credit protection, and 100% without recourse discounting. And the key in supply chain finance is improved and accelerated cash flow, and it reduces the order-to-cash cycle term. What's interesting is that in China, with the recent devaluation of the RMB, this helps anybody whose currency is depreciating because he's getting his cash and swapping it back into local currency and avoiding some of the discounts for associated with waiting for his dollars to be made available and he can sell them for dollars. We talked about the increased liquidity and borrowing capacity to grow the business because it works for the same way as for the seller as it does for the for the buyer. And it also it improves his collection. By doing this, we've transferred all the collection and receivable management expertise to us. Again, it gives the supplier more of an interesting opportunity to do business in the United States, giving him more presence. We've also noticed that this product can be used by suppliers who open in the United States sales and distribution companies that need to develop product sets which allow their U.S. import affiliate to borrow or to discount the receivables for its ultimate customer from a U.S. point of from a U.S. point or a location rather than in Asia. So what I'd like to do now is to sort of let's call it review, go back and kind of go back to the case studies that we presented in the beginning. And in each one of them, you will see that the feedback from the buyer and the seller is that it is generally a win-win for each, that it is a solution that they were looking for and could not find for their non-investment grade middle market customers, or they, in reverse, as a non-investment grade middle market company, couldn't find a program which would accept them to get this type of extended payment terms or early payment. So, in conclusion, let's talk about what next steps to a supplier early payment program. The buyer must be willing to confirm its obligation to pay for the goods, again, without offset, counterclaim, or deduction, based upon prior supplier performance. The buyer and the seller need to agree on the terms, how quickly the suppliers need to get paid, or how much additional terms the buyer wants. The pre-qualifying buyer credit is easy because a member, Dave Connolly, let's say, if he was called, would be able to underwrite the customer credit, provided we got adequate credit information. No different than you would establish any line for a large customer. And we're telling you that because we're located in this business either in the United States and or Asia, we can onboard foreign and domestic suppliers very easily. We have done it because we're located in the same time zones, generally speaking. We have done business not only in China, but Vietnam, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, any of these countries which are dealing with cross-border trade. So what is the key? The key is finding the right combination of creditworthy buyers for a middle market company who wants extended terms and are willing to provide a comfort level to the supplier and the financier. This supply chain finance tool is going to become more and more important for the middle market buyer who doesn't have access to some of the larger supply chain finance programs that some of its larger competitors, retailers, or customers have. So, I hope, first of all, I haven't spoken too quickly. Second of all, I hope that the presentation will give you some food to thought. And let's open up the mic for questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Andrew. If anyone does have any questions, you can feel free to type those into the questions function on your side panel. While we are waiting for questions, I do just want to remind everyone that you will have a brief survey pop up on your screen as you exit the webinar. It really doesn't take a lot of time to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great insight into how we can continue to make these webinars better for you. So the first question I have on here is, they said they know you sort of went over the key, but what would you say would be one or two of the biggest takeaways that you could give from this presentation?
I think the biggest takeaway from this presentation is that you now have an opportunity to, let's go back, let's do this backwards. Let's go to, bear with me. The biggest takeaway from this should be the page, maximizing cash in the supply chain, is that you now have a tool as a non-investment grade company to maximize the utilization or the or non-utilization of cash to buy and sell your product, which will more likely match your cash generation, your trade cycle, more precisely manage your trade cycle with the least amount of cash necessary to fund your inventory and or your receivables.
All right, great. All right, the next question we have here is, are there certain countries or areas where you see this being more prolific or more successful than others?
The product can follow the importer to the country where he is sourcing. So there is no limitation on the country unless it's regulatory, foreign exchange regulations, requirements for letters of credit. It gets more complicated when you need to post a letter of credit like Bangladesh, where the country is not a vertical country, it's more like a big sewing factory. So it gets more problematic because they have to finance piece goods and the whole work in process. But generally speaking, the answer really is it's wherever your principal critical suppliers source the goods, this product can be effectively utilized to meet your needs.
Well,
All right, the next question is, are there more successful cases that you have had or examples of where you have used this and it's been successful, and also cases where it has not been successful?
Well, I think yes, there are more cases than these, and that this product is growing with time. I think the unsuccessful cases is when we try to underwrite the importer and his credit. He's asking for extended terms because his credit doesn't deserve those extended terms.
All right, I'm going to leave the questions panel open for just a few more minutes. If anyone does have any questions, you can feel free to type them in. The next question we have here is, what would be the general cost of a service such as this?
Okay. The way we look at it, it is, generally speaking, depending, again, it's very buyer-specific, credit-specific underwriting, and the price could be anywhere, let's say, 6 to 10%. And what makes the product interesting is that when the buyer and seller both have a reason to need to solve their liquidity problem, that they tend to share the expenses so that it's not entirely up to one versus the other unless he needs the money, like the supplier needs the money, that he's prepared to pay the highest, the highest price relative to the importer's credit standing.
All right, and then we have a little bit more of a specific question, but asking about if you have any experience using this tool in Argentina or other countries in South and Central America.
The answer is right now no, but I will tell you that 30 years ago, I financed a tremendous amount of product out of Central and South America in another part of my life, and we did exactly the same thing.
Okay, great. It looks like that's all of the questions that we have. So with that, I think we're going to wrap the webinar. I'd like to thank Andrew and the rest of the team at Capital for taking the time to present to our listeners today. And I'd also like to thank everyone for taking their time to listen to the presentation. If you could fill out the survey on your way out, again, it gives us a lot of great insight into how we can continue to improve our webinars for you. And with that, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.